The day I crawled out of the Yangtze River, drenched from head to toe, the sky was also drizzling with a misty rain.
Yesterday, my mother brought home a girl who looked remarkably like me. She held my hand and urged me to get along well with her.
That night, I overheard their conversation.
Grace is not our biological daughter after all.
Perhaps we should.
They didn't continue. Just like the previous times, they were afraid that if I married into the Zhou family, I would no longer be obedient and useful to them. An adopted daughter could never be as reliable as a biological one.
I smiled, returned to my room, and burrowed into my bed. The next day, on my birthday, I was drugged by my family. My body grew heavier as they placed me in a sack and threw me into the Yangtze River.
Water began to fill my nose, mouth, and ears, overwhelming me with a sense of suffocation and helplessness. In the final moment, I crawled out of the river. Killing me wasn't going to be that easy. After all, I had failed to transmigrate successfully 5 times already. I changed my face. Every day of my life as the daughter of the Nan family was spent making money. I used her identity to lend money at high interest rates, sold luxury goods from classmates, and exploited every possible money-making opportunity. In just a few years, I saved up millions. Enough to change this face that was 90% similar to the real daughter, Nina.
The last 2 times, after crawling out of the Yangtze River, I fled abroad. I ran far away. But in the end, I was always caught and brought back.
Even after plastic surgery, he found me. This shows that Nina impersonating me wasn't successful, she was always recognized. And I would always fail to escape.
Since I couldn't escape, I decided not to run anymore. I changed my face and approached my fiancé's younger brother, Ethan. He was the only innocent one in that terrifying family. Much better than his brother, Logan.
The wedding proceeded as planned. I held onto Ethan's arm, enthusiastically clapping and offering my blessings from the audience. Now, my identity was Sophia, Ethan's girlfriend from abroad. In reality, I had only known him for a month. From the airport to his return home, I had deliberately created many coincidental encounters.
The simple-minded Ethan was quickly attracted to me. I knew his preferences, listened to Taylor Swift songs, enjoyed Shakespeare's works, and acted as a lively and innocent girl. It took me just 1 day to win Ethan's heart.
Logan, standing on the stage, looked quite pleased, while the real daughter, Nina, who was now called Grace, smiled radiantly in his arms. Because she was playing the role of me.
Logan seemed paler than a few months ago. Who would have thought that this gentle, slender, bespectacled businessman was actually a ruthless killer? In the previous attempts, I had all died at his hands. He enjoyed watching his prey struggle. And I was the one who excited him the most. In my first attempt, he grabbed my neck and questioned me.
"You're not Grace, who are you?"
Yes, before I transmigrated, Logan had met Grace. Just once. And he could tell the difference. Logan was terrifyingly smart. His gaze swept over the audience, not lingering on me, but in that brief moment when our eyes met. I still shivered in fear.
"What's wrong, Sophia? You seem to be trembling."
And out of the corner of my eye, I saw Logan's lips curl up as he looked at Nina. As if admiring his finest work. Grace overheard her parents' conversation through the thin walls of their modest home.
Grace is not our biological daughter after all.
Perhaps we should.
They didn't finish the sentence, fearing that if Grace married into the Zhou family, she would no longer be obedient and useful to them. An adopted daughter could never be as reliable as a biological one. Grace smiled, returned to her room, and burrowed into her bed. The next day, on her birthday, Grace was given a drink by her family, and her body grew heavier with each sip. They placed her in a sack and threw her into the Yangtze River. Water began to fill her nose, mouth, and ears, overwhelming her with a sense of suffocation and helplessness. In the final moment, she crawled out of the river. Killing her wasn't going to be that easy. After all, she had failed to transmigrate successfully 5 times already. When Ethan kissed me, I felt a bit distracted. In the corner, a burning gaze was fixed on me. I pushed him away.
Come with me, Ethan.
Let's get married and move abroad.
Ethan knelt on one knee, his eyes filled with fervor and sincerity. I didn't expect that such a short time together would lead him to make this decision. Before I could respond, Logan walked over. His face was full of anger. He reached out and slapped me hard. I was stunned. Even Ethan took a while to react. Logan, however, remained calm.
Sorry, I just wanted to test your reflexes. They don't seem very good.
God knows how much effort it took for me not to dodge. I almost had a conditioned response to him. Ethan reacted more strongly than I did. Without thinking, he rushed over and punched Logan.
Brother, you went too far. Sophia is the person I want to take care of for the rest of my life. You should show her some respect. Otherwise, I won't come back to this house again.
Back in the room, I was still shaken. After comforting Ethan, I decided to go for a walk. Unexpectedly, Logan was standing outside the door, as if he had been waiting for me. His gaze was like a leopard locking onto its prey.
Hello, Grace.
You've got the wrong person. I'm Sophia.
His smile was cold, and he slowly approached.
Do you think I wouldn't recognize you just because you found someone who looks like you? Approaching my brother after changing your appearance is a clever move, but
He leaned close to my ear and whispered.
I still prefer your original appearance.
His voice was seductive, with a power that could captivate. I continued to struggle.
I'm not Grace. You've got the wrong person.
His cold fingers pinched my chin, forcing me to look at him.
You never wore perfume, but this imposter's scent gives me a headache every day. When you're unhappy or scared, your brow furrows, and your eyes avoid mine, especially when looking at me. That unique fear is something she doesn't have. What, does playing between my brother and me excite you more? Then I'll satisfy you.
He carried me into the room, covering my mouth tightly so I couldn't make a sound. The fruit knife I suddenly pulled from my pocket only managed to scratch his forearm before he snatched it away. In my helpless and humiliating tears, he was exhausted. Then he removed the cloth from my mouth.
Why won't you let me go?
He lit a cigarette, and through the smoke, he exhaled.
Let you go? How boring. This is the 6th time, isn't it?
My scalp tingled, and my heart sank. From the beginning, I had no chance of winning. He remembered everything, so how could I win?
Actually, I'm also looking forward to seeing what new tricks you have. Finally realizing you can't escape and coming back to me. How does it feel to watch me with other women?
I sneered inwardly, but suddenly felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps the most skillful hunter is willing to become the prey.
Watching me kiss your brother, does that make you happy?
Logan's face darkened, and his smile vanished. He crushed the cigarette but in the ashtray and said menacingly,
Try it again if you dare.
Grace returned to Logan's side. Before that, she had broken up with Ethan.
He was a good person, and I shouldn't have used him.
Did your brother force you?
Grace glanced at the bug in the corner and pushed Ethan's hand away.
The one I like has always been your brother.
Then what about me? What am I to you?
I'm sorry.
Ethan, disheartened, was sent back to the UK by Logan that very night. Before he left, Grace stood by the window for a long time.
What, can't bear to see him go? You can still catch up to him if you leave now.
I shook my head. Turning around, I smiled and clung to his arm. If it weren't for my foster parents throwing me into the Yangtze River, fearing I'd be harmed again, I would have come to you long ago.
This statement was half true. Logan narrowed his eyes but said nothing. At least for now, he believed her somewhat. At the dinner table, Nina didn't recognize Grace. But she was particularly hostile towards her.
Logan, we should send Nina away.
No, I have other plans.
After dinner, Logan had some matters to attend to and left. The moment his car engine faded away, Nina burst into Grace's room.
You wretch, seducing Ethan was bad enough, but you dare touch my husband, Logan. Do you know who I am? Haven't you heard of the Nina family name?
Before she finished speaking, a few burly men appeared behind her.
If I were you, I wouldn't do this.
Enraged, Nina slapped Grace twice. The force was so strong that Grace saw stars, and her head buzzed. Then Nina tied her up in the living room.
If Logan sees you treating me like this, he won't let you off.
She laughed wantonly, scoffing at Grace's words. Grace looked at her familiar, beautiful face. All she felt was weariness.
Nina wasn't smart, and Logan hadn't shown her his true self. That's why she had the illusion that she was someone Logan cared about. That she could dispose of Grace as she pleased. The two burly men started to act. As they tried to break Grace's arm, she broke out in a cold sweat. Though she had entered this story, she had no special abilities, only her memories. So every pain was something she experienced firsthand.
Leave Logan, and maybe I'll consider letting you go.
Impossible.
Nina frowned, and with a wave of her hand, the two men began to exert force on Grace's arm. The pain was so intense that she couldn't help but cry out. Cold sweat poured down. Before her arm broke, she fainted from the pain. When she woke up, she was lying in Logan's bed. His silhouette by the floor-to-ceiling window looked somewhat desolate.
Logan.
Her voice was hoarse. He slowly turned around. It was the first time she called him that. Surprisingly, he didn't stop her.
Your arm was dislocated. The doctor has set it back. I came back too late.
There was a hint of guilt in his words. When Grace looked up again, the redness in his eyes made her instinctively clench her fists in fear. Whenever this happened, it meant he was about to take drastic measures.
Rest well. I'll take you somewhere later.
On her birthday, Grace's world turned upside down. Her family drugged her, and she grew heavier as the drug took effect. They placed her in a sack and threw her into the Yangtze River.
Water filled my nose, mouth, and ears, overwhelming me with a sense of suffocation and helplessness. But in the final moment, I crawled out of the river. Killing me wasn't going to be that easy. After all, I had failed to transmigrate successfully 5 times already.
Grace was pregnant. 2 months along. Logan treated her well. She had stayed by his side the longest, and during this time, he surprisingly didn't seek out other women.
Logan has changed. Maybe this time it will last.
Ethan returned from abroad and looked pale when he saw Grace's slightly rounded belly.
Brother, where's sister-in-law?
Nina was the wife Logan had married. She disappeared, and besides Ethan, no one seemed to suspect anything. Since that day, the business of Nina's family had also started to decline. Grace's foster parents, who had pushed her into the river, were now as anxious as ants on a hot pan. They had no energy to care about a daughter they had little affection for.
She went abroad. Not long after you left, she got bored with the country and insisted on traveling the world. I indulged her, and now, she's been gone for a while without contacting me.
Logan lied without batting an eye. After dinner, Logan went into his study. Every day after dinner, he would spend a few hours in his study handling business. During that time, Grace wouldn't disturb him. She would quietly stay in her room, reading some early education materials. As expected, Ethan knocked on Grace's door.
Are you really with my brother now?
His face was pale, and his gaze fell on her belly.
Yes, I've always liked your brother. Haven't I told you that already?
His arm tightened around her shoulder. It hurt a bit.
I don't believe it. When we were together, you treated me well too. I can't believe it was all for my brother. Was it all just an act?
Grace shook off his hand, closing the door with an angry expression. Her heart pounded. She hoped the USB drive she had slipped into his hand during the commotion would catch his attention. Ethan wasn't exactly foolish. In some ways, he and Logan were true brothers. But he was too innocent and kind, so he couldn't believe his brother would do such things. Unless he saw it with his own eyes. Grace's belly grew bigger day by day. To accompany her, Logan hadn't gone into his study for several days. He even started asking her,
Is there anywhere you want to go? I'll take you.
He meant traveling abroad. Without much thought, Grace agreed. Her obedience and compliance gradually made him lower his guard. After all, she was carrying his child. Logan's gaze towards her grew increasingly gentle. Sometimes, there was even a hint of indulgence. No matter what she asked for, even in the middle of the night, he would get up and do it. Personally cooking for her. Watching his back, Grace often found herself in a daze.
Perhaps forgetting everything and living like this wouldn't be such a bad thing for me.
She snapped out of it and looked into his shining eyes.
You make the arrangements. I'll do as you say.
On the plane, Logan tucked the corner of Grace's blanket. A lady sitting diagonally across from them pointed at her husband and spoke.
Remember when you used to treat me this well? You should cherish such a good husband. How many months along are you?
Over 4 months now.
Grace turned her head, meeting Logan's eyes.
I thought he would be annoyed by a stranger's joke.
Unexpectedly, he just quietly watched Grace chat with the lady. Now, his demeanor is increasingly gentle and composed, far from the ruthless and harsh person he used to be. After they arrived in Iceland, Logan settled Grace in the hotel. He sneaked out to take a phone call. Grace turned on her phone and contacted others. When Logan came back, his brows were slightly furrowed.
What's wrong? Is there a problem with the business?
No, everything's fine. No matter what, you and the baby are safe, don't worry.
Grace nodded. Logan tiredly collapsed onto the bed. Grace leaned over to massage his temples.
We have enough money for several lifetimes. Stop doing those dangerous things, I'm scared.
He suddenly opened his eyes, staring at Grace without saying a word. Finally, he slowly grasped her wrist and sighed.
It's not easy to step back from this position.
Then let your brother handle it, he's still young. Why do you have to take such risks?
Ethan may be my brother, but he's nothing like me. He can't handle it.
Grace stared at his back, saying nothing more. For the next few days, Logan accompanied her. They admired Iceland's mountains, took a speedboat to see the ice breaking on the sea. The scenery was beautiful, but Logan seemed distracted. One night, after he fell asleep, Grace heard him in the bathroom on the phone, talking about moving all the business to Southeast Asia. Having been by his side for so long, she had a rough idea of his dealings. The number of people who disappeared under his watch was countless. Grace instinctively touched her belly. It seemed the baby and she were in sync. There was movement. When Logan came out, his steps were quiet. After climbing into bed, he controlled his breathing to be very shallow. Grace pretended to sleep well. He leaned over, carefully wrapping his arms around her waist. Then his palm gently rested on her belly, softly caressing. In the darkness, Grace could almost feel him smile. Then, his breathing gradually steadied. She lay awake until dawn. Logan told Grace he had to go back.
The company needs me. I'll come back for you once things are settled.
Grace turned away, ignoring him. He leaned closer.
Come on, be good, just this once. I promise I won't leave you halfway again. Wait for me to come back for you.
After a gentle kiss on her forehead, Logan left. His steps hurried. It wasn't a small matter. Of course, all of this was arranged by Ethan and Grace. Ever since she heard Logan push a living person into a tiger's mouth to be devoured, Ethan changed. He was no longer the carefree, sunny boy. The only thing Grace was grateful for was that Ethan, living in the light, yearned for justice and remained upright. All thanks to Logan not dragging his own brother into the abyss of crime. Grace overheard a conversation that would change her life forever.
Grace is not our biological daughter after all.
Perhaps we should.
They stopped, just like before, fearing that if Grace married into the Zhou family, she'd no longer be obedient and useful. An adopted daughter could never be as reliable as a biological one.
I smiled, returned to my room, and burrowed into my bed.
The next day, on her birthday, Grace was drugged by her family. Her body grew heavier as they placed her in a sack and threw her into the Yangtze River. Water began to fill her nose, mouth, and ears, overwhelming her with a sense of suffocation and helplessness. But in the final moment, she crawled out of the river. Killing her wasn't going to be that easy. After all, she had failed to transmigrate successfully 5 times already. Grace is not our biological daughter after all.
Perhaps we should.
They didn't continue. Just like the previous times, they were afraid that if I married into the Zhou family, I would no longer be obedient and useful to them. An adopted daughter could never be as reliable as a biological one.
I smiled, returned to my room, and burrowed into my bed. The next day, on my birthday, I was drugged by my family. My body grew heavier as they placed me in a sack and threw me into the Yangtze River.
Water began to fill my nose, mouth, and ears, overwhelming me with a sense of suffocation and helplessness. In the final moment, I crawled out of the river. Killing me wasn't going to be that easy. After all, I had failed to transmigrate successfully 5 times already. After the 5th time of facing death, when I was transported into the book again, the system appeared.
Killing Logan will not free you from this book.
I tried many times to kill him, but he had the protagonist's aura, and I simply couldn't do it. What I truly needed to do was not to survive in this book. Nor was it to kill him, but to change his predetermined fate.
So, I gambled with my last chance. I calculated. Since he cared so much about family, even if he had long suspected that his brother Ethan was plotting against him, he still couldn't bring himself to act against him. Then, how could he remain indifferent to me, who was carrying his child? If I died to save him, the effect would be even more profound. I gambled correctly. Logan changed.
The day before I turned 18, my foster parents brought the real daughter back. I voluntarily stepped aside. There was no fiancé, no reason that required me to give up my place. My foster parents didn't harm me. Instead, they held on to me, reluctant to let me go. I still shook my head and refused. I only hoped that in this life, they and the real daughter could live well.
I stood at the crossroads. Across from me was a familiar figure. It was Ethan. Even though he didn't know me, he still gave me a big smile.
Thinking of the previous life, I felt a pang of guilt. I had always been using him, and he knew it, but he never complained. Because he was someone who lived in the light, with a broad heart.
I'm not helping you. I'm saving people, and also saving my brother's lost conscience. If he can harm people, I can save them.
I thought, he did this not because of any feelings for me, but because he was a good person, or at least a person with a conscience. In the previous life, after I died, he brought my remains back and gave me a proper burial. He would visit me during festivals and tell me about interesting things that happened, finally offering a bouquet of white magnolias. Because that was my favorite flower.
I turned to leave, but I bumped into someone's arms. The apology stuck in my throat when I looked up and saw who it was.
Grace, hello.
Grace, I did what I promised you.
He no longer wore rimless glasses, dressed in casual sportswear, looking much like his brother.
So, will you keep your promise to me? My feelings for you have never changed in this life.
I looked at his outstretched hand. For a long time. Finally, I shook my head.
Why, everything I did was for you.
Thank you for everything you did for me, and also for yourself and your brother. Logan, your change wasn't for anyone else.
I grasped his hand, forming a fist. His fate had changed. And my task was complete. I could finally escape this world.
In the end, I left him a letter, telling him about my ordinary life. I told him I was not Grace, my soul was Sophia. I came from an ordinary family, with loving parents and a brother who often fought with me over the TV remote. I was hit by a car the day before the college entrance exam and ended up in this place. Birds have their skies. And I don't belong here. I hoped all this would bring him peace.
Finally, congratulations on living honorably in the light, Logan.